I mean, the light was on, so I assumed that it was, but it was not.
Yeah. Like it comes down to like the most simplest tech thing, and then you're just like, ah. Hi.
Hi. Oh my gosh. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Me too. Gabriel put us in contact, right? Watchmen Privacy. I was trying to
No,
remember.
no, it was Aja at the Bitcoin Film Fest.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. Okay, okay.
Yeah, so she sent me a whole list of so I basically like interview women in the Bitcoin space. So I know that you're maybe not exclusively Bitcoin, but
Sure.
tangentially you are.
No, yeah.
And so she had sent me a whole list when the film festival was coming up of movies that were screening and the ones that had like female directors and that kind of stuff. So I was really like fascinated to learn about you. I really wanted to watch the movie and I thought that it wasn't available because I tried to get it on Amazon where it was listed and then I realized I could rent it on YouTube. So I've put it on my list of
Oh
things to
no.
watch tonight.
Okay. Gotcha. 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 Do you want to watch it first or still good to go?
No, I actually think I'd
No.
like to just chat to you about it first. Yeah,
Okay.
I did watch a chunk of, I haven't finished it, but I watched Cody's presentation. So Cody, for those who don't know, who is kind of, I guess, the focus of the documentary. Um, so I watched his presentation, which is incredibly engaging, actually, because it's mostly, well, there's a big detour into Rene Girard, whose
Mhm.
works I've read, and I've also read a really good summary of his work. But I'm really fascinated to understand, I guess, your background as a filmmaker. So, how you got into this space, and then how you ended up making this movie, and really like the whole journey of it.
Oh
Um,
my.
so, I think, first of all, it'd be great just to kick off, maybe with you just introducing yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Okay. Um, Name is Jessica Solce. I became a documentary filmmaker in 2013. I was always in film doing and theater, doing random things, directing. Just I did a lot of stuff out of college. But in 2013, I was kind of returning back to filmmaking. And my first documentary kicked off, which was a doc called No Control, because I visited family who had friends, and it was post Sandy Hook. So all over media, we had this very specific US discussion about the gun debate. And it was the first time in my life where I was actively kind of understanding that the media had one message, and that one message is a very specific message, and everyone falls into place, if you will. And I got very tired of the discussion specifically and only being about the fear and children running out of buildings. Like that was the entire discussion online. So it was the first time that I was watching media and news with like a different viewpoint, or my viewpoints were changing. I was seeing them differently. So when I saw this friend on my visit who was brand marketing, creation of brands, he was going back into art, and he was making this 20-foot, I have to remember all this information, this 20-foot by 7-foot AR-15 pencil on paper. And when he said how he was going to make it and the just how largesse it was going to be, I was like, this is going to be actually a very beautiful piece of art, meticulous. And 5 days later, I was back up in north of Boston, starting a documentary. At that moment, I really was like, I literally had never even had the inkling that I was ever going to make a documentary at that point. And by the end of that 3 days of filming, I immediately knew that this was going to be a larger piece. On camera in No Control, Greg introduces me to the character of Cody. I hadn't heard of him yet. And that was very much just a couple months after he started kicking off with all of his work. So I basically the next day when I got back from filming, I wrote Cody, I called him, and just until he said yes, I didn't stop bugging him. So it only took a few days, luckily. So in 2013, I made a first film. Well, it took till 2015. It was purchased by a distributor and went out. And when that was done, I never knew I was going to be making films about gun rights, about the state, of control, but this is what I fell into. So No Control is a very specific doc in the sense that, and it was very hard to sell as well because it doesn't take any sides. It has people from, it has politicians, it has Cody, it has the artist. The artist and Cody, Greg Boker and Cody Wilson are the two like yin yang, definitely that hold the film together. But I talk with many other people and they all get to tell you why they believe what they believe. And you get to walk away with really asking yourself, is there any efficacy of gun control in the United States? Is it all political? And is it over with the introduction of 3D printed guns and the more active dissemination of files to make this an information online? Okay, so that's where No Control ended. So 2015. And I just wasn't done with his story. And so in April of 2015, or maybe possibly the month before, I called Cody and was like, I'm not done with your story. I just want to see where this goes. And I knew at that point it was going to be long. I mean, one of the motivations to make Death Athletic, my second documentary film, was that now that I was steeped in this gun world, I just saw that nobody was making, to me, honest, creating an honest history of what was happening. Everything was either super biased, very tilted. Maybe they would get some of the ideas, but then they would just have to drive home what you're supposed to believe about those ideas. There are great films out there, but there's a lot that don't allow or don't want the audience to think for themselves. It's about the director's viewpoint. It's a total genre. Take it or leave it. Sometimes you love them, sometimes you hate them, sometimes it's just where you sit in the political spectrum, right? But at that point, it was truly under my nerves. So it was a very easy way he said yes immediately. And I went down in April and I started filming again.
Which is kind of insane, by the way. I mean, why was he so willing to let you do that? Is that just his personality where he's kind of like, was it live free or die? Does he really embody that where he's like, I don't care if you film anything? Because given the sensitivity of some of the stuff that he was doing, I'm kind of surprised that he just sort of let you essentially follow him around for 7 years and film him.
Because of what I said I was going to do with the No Control, and I did. I believe that film, and he's mentioned it as well, built a level of trust. And he knew I wasn't going to enter his spaces, his work, and follow him just to create a story to force an idea upon his story. He trusted me not to do that. And if I didn't have that, I don't think he would have let me in. He had another film that was finishing at that point. And I think he was pretty much kind of done. I was the last person that started filming him. I mean, he's done news. He's been very much out there. But because of the trust that I built with No Control, I made exactly what I said I would make. He was willing, and we became friendly, we became friends. I was very interested and curious about all the ideas. He's the one that introduced me to Bitcoin in 2013. So there was lots and lots of ideas and things, and the conversations were fantastic. I love a good intellectual conversation, and he can really dial up that notch very quickly. So yeah, he said yes.
Can I ask you as well then, when you first mentioned about after Sandy Hook, how you were kind of alerted to the fact that the reporting was very biased, what was it about your background that led to that? Was it that your family were perhaps took a different position on it? What were the influences that actually made you realize that there was biased news? Because talking from my own experience, I remember Sandy Hook very well. And, I'm obviously from the UK, so I've grown up in a country where civilians don't have guns. Typically, and it's very, very difficult or very rare. You might, if you're hunting or something, you might have a license, but it's very restricted. And I never questioned the sort of orthodoxy of gun control. In fact, to me, Americans were quite unnecessarily extreme, and I would look at it and be like, this is a country with a huge amount of gun violence. These people are ridiculous. Why don't they just do what the rest of the world has done? Why is this even a discussion point? And I then moved to the US in 2015 and then lived through most of the lockdown period of that. And I was a huge Branch Covidian, by the way, so I'm not trying to give myself a pass here. But when I saw some of this stuff playing out, I completely had a 180 on my views about gun control. So for me, it really took being immersed in American culture, understanding American history, and the battle against kind of authority and monarchy and all of that kind of stuff that took place, and why the US has the Second Amendment and why it's so important to people. But I'm just curious as to like what led you to question that media narrative.
I think some of it's personality that kicks in. You return to maybe your some people question everything. I think I've always been there, and that's been instilled. That definitely was instilled with me, and with health and on all these other topics from childhood. I have a mother who's aggressively contradictory to, like, somebody says you need to take this medicine, she'll out research every doctor she can and tell them what she thinks is a better route. That was the mentality I've always been brought up in. So, I don't know what specifically in that moment happened. Maybe because it was, I was young. It was the first time where maybe I was actually really paying attention, because it did feel like that was a big moment in time. Um,
How old were
and
you then?
I was just trying to think about that. I was in my 20s. I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
Did that happen? Yeah, my 20s. Um,
It was
so
2009, I think, if I remember rightly, December 2009.
yeah, 20s. Um, so I just was, and then I come from a background. I'm originally a Texan. Um, I shot guns when I was a kid. I did that with my father. I lived in New York at the time. I'd lived there for a very long time. So like when you live there, like you just don't even think about that, because it's not available. It's not, I mean, it is available, but goodness gracious, boy, do you have to go through the ringer to get something like that. Months and months and months and whatever. I never wanted to go through that process. Um, so I think also my background is I come from a lot of different cultural spaces. So I'm not specifically like, at that point in my life, I just, the Second Amendment is what it was. You know what I mean? I didn't overthink it. I didn't think about it too much. I believe people should have guns. And then if you don't want it, then people shouldn't have guns. Like that's where that was in that moment. Um, I guess I don't know what was the specific thing. I just know that I really started paying attention. Um, and I've never been one to watch TV or media much, but it was another moment where we had so many social media sources that even if you didn't, you were watching. Like, everything was coming at you. Future shock had you whether you liked it or not. So yeah, that's what brought me there. And then yeah, I guess that's it.
And then so talk to me about like what it was like making Death Athletic, because I think for people who don't make documentaries and movies, it's hard to kind of understand the process. So were you fully committed to that for the full 7 years, or were you doing lots of other stuff at the time and just jumping in and out as and when you could?
For my own personal work, I was fully committed. I do other things on the side, money work, because I'm crazy enough to, because I started both films without funding. If I had waited for that process to start those films, they would have never started, literally never started. Death Athletic, until the very end, like it was impossible to get people behind me with this film. From friends to everyone was against me doing this film. It was a ridiculous thing. Jessica, what are you making? How dare you? Like, I had individuals that were very angry at me for making it. Cody would always joke around, be like, Jessica, you're still making this? Like, no one's ever going to watch this. They're not going to allow you to sell this. And it was a joke, but based in, like, steeped in reality. Because when we tried to sell it for the first time in 2018, one of the streaming, I had a incredible PR guy at that point. And And he was the one with all the connections to, you have to have connections for anyone to watch anything, even to get in film festivals. You don't have connections, forget about it. And one of the streaming sites said it was on the wrong side of history. And the moment when they actually said that, I realized, okay, this is going to be really, really hard. And that was 2018. So to get post-production on this film, luckily I'd been very involved and taken into the Bitcoin and gun community. And there was a festival called Bitcoin and Guns. And this was so yeah,
Oh,
great conference.
it's just
And
hilarious to me because the Bitcoin community is so diverse. It's ridiculous. It's like you've got like the progressives, you've got the environmentalists, and you've got like Bitcoin and guns.
Bitcoin and Guns. It's really a fun community. So I had participated on the conferences, and the third conference, this was, oh goodness, 2022. I'm losing all my time frames. 2021. I just knew, like, if I didn't have post money at this point, this film was never going to get finished. It was never going to finish because post-production on a film is a lot of money. Everything's a lot of money, but a lot of people were giving
What
me
does that actually involve? Is that like putting the soundtrack on and doing all of the slicing and dicing, or what's post-production for the layperson?
post-production is editing, graphics, music, color, color rating. So audio. So it's all everything. So it's everything that after you finish literally filming, what all the stuff that happens afterwards, the organization onwards is post-production. And that does take a very heavy, it's a lot of money. So at the Bitcoin and Guns conference, I had cut a sizzle with I had found an editor, which was a whole other thing, because looking for editors for this film, every single editor that I talked with wanted to put their own thing on top of it and was not happy with what I was creating. Like, this was a process of like, kind of like isolationism until you find someone that really wanted to get behind it. And when they were behind it, it was like beyond 100%. So we put together Sizzle. I went to the conference and I was like, well,
Sizzle being like a little short, you mean?
yeah, like it was about 5 minutes.
Right.
I was like, I have nothing to lose. I threw it up there. And a lot of people in the community had seen me over the years and, trust and where things are going. And I said, I'm going to show this. And afterwards, somebody in this room is going to walk up to me and give me $100,000. And that happened. When does that happen? That happened. And that made
Asking you shall receive.
that is rare. That is super, super rare. And hats off to Samurai, because they were my absolute angels in that moment. They saw what I was making and they got it. They understood it. And they also helped fund post-production and just hands off. They never said, we want input, we want like nothing. They just hands off. And then as watershed moments happen, somebody else randomly calls me like 3 weeks later and was like, I would like to fund your film as well. And I was like, are you a Fed? Like, what is happening? And then this wonderful individual, Thomas Donnelly, jumped on. And then I really had the ability to finish the film. So going into what you asked me about the process, all documentaries are different. If you're making a doc for like Hulu or Netflix, the directors don't own anything anymore. I think they have very big overhead. You're working with a lot of people on set. It's a very different thing. I'm very bare bones. Of course, once you start putting a camera in front of people, they change. You and I change on the Zoom conference, no matter what. I mean, we just start maybe talking differently. I don't know. So my keeping it bare bones just really helps to like attempt to disappear.
Do you mean because the person being filmed doesn't have this kind of crew around them and it all
Yeah,
becomes
yeah.
very
Like
right?
every single individual changes the energy of a room, right? Like just that naturally happens. So, and the more people it just changes things. That's just a pure fact. You have 10 people watching you, that's going to change versus one person with a camera whom you might trust or whom you're very into something. So anyways, it's very bare bones. until I used, whenever I could, my DP Jason Hess. So oftentimes it was just he and I with the camera, running. I'm
That's
running.
my dog barking.
Oh, I don't
Apologies.
even hear it. I didn't
I
even
do
hear it.
not.
Going crazy.
I was recording something last night and then I played it back and I was like, oh, for God's sakes, there he is. Hold that thought 1 second because I'm getting a sink delivered from IKEA. It might be them. Stay there. I'll be right back.
You're okay. No problem. No problem. No problem.
Oh
Was
my
it a
God.
sink?
No, it was nobody.
No
I
sink.
opened the door. He does that though a lot. It's like, somebody's just like walking past like 50 meters away. And if they've got like a dog with them, it can be the tiniest dog. He'll just lose his shit. So it's great because the perimeter is very, very manned. But like sometimes I'm like, really?
That's That's
So
awesome.
sorry, let's pick up where we were. The
Right,
process, right? So your DP, sorry, what's DP?
Director of photography. So
Ah,
person behind the camera.
right.
Director of photographer is a little bit more a special, that you see director of photography on big production films. Sometimes they just say cameraman or things like that. He's my DP.
Right.
Um, so oftentimes it was just he and I, him with camera, me with the camera, running sound. A few times through the years, I was like, I needed somebody else running sound. This is going to be a little too crazy because filming a situation is obviously super important, but if the sound is awful, like you just lose it. I mean, if for some reason, and tech happens, like bad moments happen, things get overexposed for some crazy reason because your camera just starts flunking out or something. Things happen all the time. So sometimes I had a sound guy there. It was mostly for bigger moments. So very, very small crew. And through the years, it was just really staying on top of what was happening, staying connected with Cody, checking in, monitoring. And then sometimes I knew things were going to be there and I had like a month or so to like schedule it out. And sometimes it was like, oh, I have to be somewhere in 3 days. And you just figure it out along the way. I mean, it's kind of part of the excitement and the stress of doing
Yeah.
it. But
That's it.
so yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask. I'm curious about the title of the film because when I first heard it, I was like, "What's this? Like, I don't even understand. What does
Sure.
this mean, Death Athletic?" And
Sure.
then I was listening to your interview with Marty Bent from last year, where you were sort of touching on some of that concept, and he was talking about the euthanasia. And then I was watching Cody's presentation.
Which presentation did you watch?
It's the defense. So he's doing it at some event.
I bet you watched the Bitcoin and Guns conference. Is it
Uh,
called Athletic?
yeah, it's called Death
Yep.
Athletic, a speech, defense distributed.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah, I
talks
actually,
about the sort of Greek concept of euthanasia and then about, the death athletic. But for the purposes of people listening, could you kind of try and conceptualize what that means? Because it's a really interesting title for a documentary and it's not immediately obvious. And it's kind of like, what does she mean by this? Could you talk about that concept?
sure. So we can go at different angles. I'll tell kind of like the bigger picture as well. So in one of the things that I had to do to also understand Cody more was do a lot of reading. Because if you don't know about Cody, he speaks in philosophical terms. He's constantly pulling things that he's read. He's an incredible mind. So in preparation for almost every conversation, at least in those beginning years, I was doing a lot of reading. And in 2015, there was a book that I don't know, we all started like, we didn't physically pass around, but we were all reading called You Must Change Your Life by Peter Sloterdijk. And in that book, he uses a term called death athlete. And it is framed in a very religious context in the sense that Jesus is a death athlete. He knew his future. He had to look death in the face. He had to accept it in order to accomplish his purpose. He and understand that like that was his final end. So it's very, in that way, it's very literal. It's death. But the idea with death athletic is taking it to modern day terms, in the sense that we have a lot of death athletes right now. You can say Assange's,
Snowden.
Aaron Schwartz, Snowden, individuals that are either imprisoned, Ross Ulbricht, imprisoned for life, I would say is very close to a death. Or just socially or culturally just annihilated, if you will. But they remake themselves, perhaps. So in this term, in this modern age, a death athlete is someone who like looks into what they must do in their life, accepts the challenge, if you will, and knows that it might cause some sort of like death, social death, cultural death, being blocked, being whatever, you know, all the terms that get passed around right now, and going through it and realizing that it doesn't matter. You still have to accomplish your goal, and you might have many deaths for those types of personalities or those types of people that take on such challenges. But it felt at that moment when I turned the film's name to that, it was like a slogan and a cheering of the individuals who do it. Samurai right now, I would say they fit into that category as well. You might not like them. You might not, you know, they could be a little saucy online, etc. But whatever happens to them is going to set a precedent.
Could you actually, just for anyone listening who doesn't know, could you just summarize about that, what's happening with Samurai?
The little bit I know, because also everything's been pretty locked down. But they were indicted by the US government. So they, meaning two individuals whose names weren't public, Hyone and William. So T-Dev and I think Samurai, William, Hyone just went by Samurai. For, what's the word?
It was a money transmitter stuff, I
yes.
think, wasn't
but
it? Yeah.
Conspiracy too. So not even like, the funny thing is in the indictments, it says conspiracy to, not that they're being indicted for the actual doing of. It's being indicted for the like intent, for the conspiracy. So this can set a precedent that you can build something and some bad actor uses it, or you say something online like, I don't care who uses it. A drug lord could. And that could be, I think, misconstrued as or used as a term of conspiracy to. Oh, you don't care? You're building it knowing that this can be used in a bad way. And this, you know, they're Bitcoin, but this can affect any crypto. This can affect Monero down the line. Just because Bitcoin's just the biggest, you know, the biggest prize at the moment.
Yeah, for people who don't know, I mean, Samurai Wallet is a coin mixer, right? So it's basically a privacy tool to allow you to mask, I guess, your transactions with Bitcoin, which is like you say, it could be used by a drug dealer, but it's also like a very necessary piece of privacy kit for people because the ledger is completely public. So it's a way so that people don't see, for example, your effectively your banking transactions on a public ledger. I think that's kind of how I would describe it. And they were sponsoring Death Athletic, correct? So they were the funder that had come in when you did your sizzle and said, somebody please give me money.
Yes. Yes. They came in and they became my executive producer. So yeah, so that Death Athletic is that individuals who are compelled to create something, build something, knowing that the end result might be dangerous in all the different forms that is today. And it doesn't have to literally be death. At the very beginning of the film, which it's funny because nobody really like catches it, or not that they've expressed it to me, is that he says you have to, he says, live, die, repeat. And Cody's story is that he lives, dies, repeat, because he's built a lot of things along the line and caused a lot of trouble. And there's been lots of ups and downs, legally, personally, everything. So it's kind of embracing that danger may cometh, but it's necessary. That's what
it's
it is.
interesting. Can you talk a little bit about Cody as a person for people who don't know who he is? Because I think in the world that you've been inhabiting, he's a very well-known and prominent character. But, you know, for example, to discovering you, I had never heard of him. So I knew about the 3D gun printing discussion very superficially,
Sure.
but I didn't know anything about the status of it or who the players were. So that was a bit of a rabbit hole that I had to go down.
Sure.
But could you sort of summarize who he is and why he is the main protagonist of your documentary?
Sure. So Cody was the first person that took the idea of the 3D printed gun and put it out there in the mainstream. This is 2013. He starts dabbling in at the end of 2022, 2012, sorry, but 2013 it actually happens. And at that point, other people had been kind of like playing with it, but it would have been maybe stuck in a very hobbyist world. He was studying to be a lawyer at the time. He didn't finish that because his work, took off. But he was always working with extreme mischief and knowing and trying to work around the law. So always being in this world or moment where he knew they couldn't get him because there was no law created yet. So when there's no law created, then it creates this funky place of like unknown, which can be super dangerous as well, of course, in the way of like legality and if you're pissing off the government, which he did continuously and still does.
I'm
So
actually
he,
amazed he's still alive, I'll be honest.
yeah, because it's got a lot more to do. um, he created the first 3D printed gun. At that moment in media history, Vice was rocking. Everybody, Wired, Forbes. It was a moment where like everyone was running these headlines and they loved it. They couldn't get enough, even though like the tone might be like, look at this horrible person, look at this terrible person. He knew that all media was good media. To him, he didn't care. Like he really was completely detached from that. It was a game. You can see him sometimes even playing, like he's smirking, he's having a grand old time. And they couldn't get enough. And he used that. And it really, to push this out into the mainstream, it took a kind of character and person who could meticulously outtalk someone, understand law, and understand history all at the same time. And so people couldn't get enough of him because he was very intellectually stimulating, whether you liked what he was doing or not. So it created massive, I think, conundrums in a lot of people's minds, and they couldn't get enough. Over the years, finally, like, I think the media caught up that they were being basically, you know,
Used.
used, yeah, used as water carriers for his messaging. And they kind of started laying off. And I don't know if that was a top-down thing or whatever, or nobody would like allow, they didn't want this in print. And there's still Ars Technica still covered things and stuff, but it really watered down. So Cody put this out into the world. But he was really, even though there was a thing called FOSCAD, a group of people that were building on FOSCAD, it was all very kind of like super under the radar. Cody's name was the only, if you knew what was happening, he was the only person and name that you knew. He was getting all the slack. He was getting,
And sorry, FOSCAD, just for people who don't know, that's free open source software, and CAD referring to CAD like the design technology, right?
design files. Yeah.
Yeah.
So FOSCAD was basically, which I think it still exists, just people come, not a blog, but a community coming together and sharing and studying each other's files and trying things out. But it was very still under the radar. So all government attention, all media was about Cody Wilson and Defense Distributed. He also, in that time, I don't know if I should tell the whole story, but you'll see it in the documentary. There was a lot of legal processes that happened. He is actually the one who sued the US government first because they left him in limbo about whether or not, from 2013 to 2015, when he decided to sue the US government, where I was there filming at that moment, he was just in limbo. They wouldn't give him an answer, which technically the government, like, you deserve to get an answer because nobody's company can just wait in limbo for years in order to continue, but they wouldn't. So he flipped it and sued them. And in order to do that, he built something called the Ghost Gunner, which was the first CNC machine that could be like be on a desktop CNC, which was a new technological like advancement, that now there's more and more types. And of course, it's gotten better over the years, but it could cut 80% lowers. If you watch the film Death Athletic, you'll get a little bit more information, your audience as well, about how all that kind of like layers out. But being kind of this like godfather of the 3D printed movement, when he got into criminal trouble in 2018, there was this swelling of kind of like wonder if this was just going to completely die out. And it was,
are you referring to the underage sex thing?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the film covers that as well. And it was the first time that other individuals, even though they decided to do it anonymously, kind of stepped in and started creating and started putting things out. They took up the mantle, if you will, not knowing what was going to happen to Cody at that point. And then all of a sudden in 2019, 2020, 2021, tons of people, not tons, but a good amount of people started flooding the space, being much more open about what they were doing, creating websites and everything. But still to this day, the government, because it's still illegal to put it just directly on the internet, because it's not about sharing with domestic citizens. That's legal in the United States. It's about sharing it with foreign individuals, because that goes under ITAR, which is international controls that were built during the Cold War, that of course, once laws go up, they never come down, that really control scientific developments, anything about lots of munition things, lasers, all these other things.
Wait, so you saying that it's legal in the US to share a 3D printed gun CAD file, if you like, but
Yeah.
if you're sharing it such that somebody outside of the US can access it, then that's where you're infringing on,
That's where you're in
that.
trouble. But
Gosh, that's interesting. Huh.
there's weird turns in that as well, because New Jersey has created it and made it illegal in their state. So at one point they had to turn off DefCAD, which is a depository of 3D CAD files. They had to block everyone in New Jersey. So in New Jersey, don't do this, because if you're technically, I think, found with it on your computer, that's a felony. And if you share it in New Jersey, that's a felony. So now states, because this is developed and throughout so many years, like California is a dangerous state if you want to be a gun lover. New Jersey, you can't. But
is that not an infringement of the Second Amendment? Is that not unconstitutional?
Yes, a lot of people would say that, but states do push controls, and then it's up to their citizens to fight back. So I don't know where Defense Distributed's lawsuit with New Jersey stands anymore, because I don't follow this as not nearly as aggressively as I used to. But they were in, if it's still going, they've been in a legal battle with New Jersey, I think since 2018. So lots of legal battles happening. He probably has like 6 to 8 lawsuits continuously happening to this day. But for the basic part is that it's legal in the United States, but it's about foreign transactions, right? So if you have a website, anyone can come and get you because of a website, but they still have never, ever went after anyone, any group, any individual. You can find it, and we could search it up right now and find some CAD files if you're dexterous computer.
I might get in trouble for that.
I don't know where you live, but you might not, because I don't know where you live. But you can find them super easy. But the government's not went after anybody else.
I wonder if the reason for that is, though, is that if they do, then you end up having the law tested, and you risk it going up to the Supreme Court, which I would assume the Supreme Court is probably going to turn around and say this is an infringement of the Second Amendment.
It's already happened.
Oh, it has.
So with Cody, it went to the Supreme Court, but they decided not to. I don't know what the words are. They decided not to
take the case.
And they just like throw it back to the previous decision.
Right.
Doesn't mean it can't go again, but there's so many twists and turns into the legal part of it, that if this is curious to you or anyone listening, like, Watch the film. It goes through it. Cody wins in many ways, many times, and then something happens or he gets resued. Or at one point, his lawsuit against the DOJ, he technically wins by getting a license. But attorney generals around the United States, 20 of them, end up suing the DOJ and Cody on one side against 20 attorney generals. So all of a sudden, yeah, the DOJ and Cody are partners in a lawsuit and being sued together. So there is a great humor to this, right? So it's ongoing. It's just constant and ongoing. And California is definitely coming down with as many rules and laws as possible.
So I'm curious then, like as a filmmaker, how do you come to a place where you decide to wrap that up? Because that was an insanely long period of time of filming. As you said, like this stuff is still ongoing. So how do you decide when to conclude the story? Like when does the story end, and does it end, or do you just leave it hanging?
Yeah, that was it's a question many times that I had through the years. But I think the very last time I filmed was in January of 2021, but it was really just they were filming something. I knew it was going to be beautiful. You need lots of B-roll for a film, and I didn't know what I was going to use it for. It ended up just being used for a montage at the end, which one of my favorite montages. So the last time I actually filmed was in 2021. But I knew by 2020 that this was, once he got into personal criminal trouble, because there was a moment there that I thought I had a film. I thought I could start wrapping it up. But that happened literally at the exact same time I was sitting down with my PR guy, and that happened. And then we're like, oh, maybe people will be into it. Unfortunately, now, because there's, people love to see somebody fall in a way, right? That really gets people.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm British. We get that very well. That's our whole
yeah.
thing.
So
We
I was like,
build celebrities up and then we tear them down.
let's count them down. So I was like, oh goodness. So I was like, I guess maybe I'll get post-production. Still wouldn't get that post-production funding from any of the streaming, but that literally happened at the same time. So I thought at one point, but in some ways, like maybe it could have kind of been the same film. Yes. But it was important, of course, when that happened, I couldn't stop then. That would have been like, I don't know, just disingenuous to stop then. That was, if I'm profiling Cody and his
Yeah.
life and everything that's happening, I had to see where that story led me. So
The only information I have about that is what I garnered from Wikipedia, which I know can be a little bit biased, but my understanding from Wikipedia, and correct me if this is wrong, but just for people listening, he got accused of having underage sex with somebody. And so he was charged with that because it was through some website called Sugar Daddy something.
yeah,
But the people signing up to the website, so he had slept with a 15-year-old girl that he had paid, but the people signing
16.
up to the website had to give it, oh, really? Wikipedia says 15. But they had to do a declaration to say that they were over 18. So whoever it was, she would have had to do an acknowledgement, like a click through, I guess, to say she was 18.
I mean, these websites, I immediately jumped on that website to see what would happen and signed up just because I was filming it.
The things you have to do for your job.
I hope it's not still up. No, because I wanted to see I had to do my own research. This was a big blow to me at that moment as well. I mean, it was intense. And it's
When
literally
you say a big blow, do you mean personally because he's somebody you were friendly with, or in terms of the
absolutely.
production? Oh, okay. So the personal relationship.
Yeah, I mean, anything, because you're asking yourself so many questions, intentional, not intentional, what happened, what you hear on the news do they actually, like, a lot of stuff out there is not real stuff. A lot of stuff said at the very end after he received his not punishment, what do you call it? His sentence, like things that were said that the notes are allowed to be read afterwards, and the judge has no say. Like it's allowed, like, to present. I'm not going to say specifics because I don't want to like burn anyone. Somebody read a note and there was information in this note that did not happen. It was not real. It did not acknowledge reality. But if you hear it, boy, that's intense. Like bruising and all this stuff. Nowhere in any file, from the counselor to the police to anyone, did they ever mention any of this. But people reported on that. because it was salacious. And it was obviously the writer of this letter wasn't really seeing their individual daughter. How can you help someone if you don't see them? I shouldn't probably go into that. But anyways, very easy to sign up to sugardaddymeets.com. You just have to say, I'm 18. That's it. It's
But
asked.
legally speaking, I mean, I don't know the legalities of what, and I know
Sure.
like in the US, there's also this process where like if you plead guilty to something, you get a lighter sentence, even if you didn't do it, and it's abundantly clear you didn't do it. People that basically the way the system works, as I understand it, is oftentimes they'll just be like, well, if you plead guilty, then none of
Get a
us have
life.
to go through the hassle of a court case, so we'll give you a smaller sentence,
It's a
or you can
little,
spend the next 10 years of your life fighting this, take your pick. But
it's
without
a little,
knowing the facts of the case, I read it on Wikipedia and I was like, so somebody basically represented themselves as being over a certain age, which they were not. And to
yeah.
me at that point, I'm actually amazed that charges were even brought, because the crime is the lying about your age, not the using the website, presumably.
Well, in the United States, only 22 states allow that to enter into evidence. Every other state, it is a felony by act.
Oh, really?
If you commit the act, that is a felony. Despite, however, if you go to a bar and, or if I go to, I won't use you. If I go to a bar and I see a gentleman and I'm like, what age are you? And they're like, I'm 22. Here's my license. Here's my passport. I'm 22. He's drinking at a bar. I go home in Texas. He's 16. It's my fault. It's a felony. It's criminal,
Wow.
period. It
Huh.
doesn't matter. So you don't have to be actually seeking that out to get in trouble. In 22 states, you can actually enter that evidence into court and they have to consider it, not in Texas. The thing is, as you'll find out in the film, this young lady did have a large history. So there was a lot happening behind the scenes. And he did plead guilty for a lesser degree, and he had certain things that he had to do, etc. And people are like, why didn't he go to court? Like, why didn't he go to jail? Which he did have a good lawyer and they found a lot of information. And maybe also because he's an individual that would fight tooth and nail for it. And also, if they went to court, all her history would have come out.
Mm.
It was 2 months, as I understand it, she was 2 months away from being 17. When the act happened, 17 is the legal age. And when they would have went to court, all of her past would have been entered into evidence.
Right.
So I think this is not in the film, but I think that was also considered, because once the government found out that this was happening, I personally don't think this was a conspiracy, like this was a honeypot situation at all.
Oh, because that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, I knew it was coming. I don't think it was a honeypot situation at all, but the act and the reality that this happened created a situation that was perfect for the government to come after him.
Mm.
They just wasn't probably expecting a situation where there was a lot of history attached as well. And they couldn't find anything of acknowledging that she was underage. If that was in any, because they were just DMing on like open, they weren't hiding anything. They were DMing on the website and DMing over their phone. So if that had entered into, oh, then he would have been cooked.
Right.
Like, would have been absolutely cooked if he had known that, if there was any kind of proof, cooked. But nobody could find anything like that. So it's tricky. I don't think it was a honeypot at all. As he says in the film, which if you watched, it wasn't his first rodeo. So he doesn't use those words, but he'd done that a few times. So yeah. So after when that happened, I knew I had to capture all of that. I couldn't leave the story hanging, because the film in the end is a intimate profile of Cody Wilson and Defense Distributed, really going into the motivations and ethos behind it, all the ideas and his story. So that was a really important part.
It's actually fascinating watching his talk on YouTube, because he's very mesmerizing actually to watch. And I'm really curious because you've got to know him really well. And I feel like to a certain extent, people can be very charming and they can be very engaging in a kind of a very superficial level, but you've really gone kind of deep into his life and been with him through a whole series of things that have happened. And I think you even said that like you would consider him a friend. Like, how do you sort of see him after that experience? Because I would imagine with most people, they have like a brief glimpse into it. And then, every human being is incredibly complex with positives and negatives and lots of different sides. And I'm very much of the view that you can never truly know somebody because none of us even truly know ourselves. We haven't seen ourselves in every possible situation. But how do you kind of feel about him as a persona and as a personal individual after having gone through that journey?
I mean, he is a very charismatic person in person as well. Um, I mean, ah, how do I see him as I mean, he's just, I think he actually represents himself really well on camera and everything he does. I mean, he's mischievous and antagonistic, but at the same time, he's just like a bookworm that's constantly studying and trying to figure out ways to get around ideas and really like throw knives into a system. That's really who he is. But in person, when people meet him, I think a lot of times people think that they're going to meet someone who's kind of like mean and caustic, or maybe because if you hear guns, if you're not into all that, you think you're gonna, but he's really charming person. Yeah. I
Interesting.
mean, I think of him now as I did then. Like it's I was like obsessed with the entire process of what was happening. How one person could be so successfully antagonistic. Like you said a little while back, he's still not in jail. He's still
Mm.
doing it. He's still pushing through all these ups and downs and continuing. I mean, it's a very stressful life. And
Yeah, very.
I've seen him throughout the years, and it's a very stressful, hard life. Um,
What do you
uh,
think drives him ultimately?
Hmm. I think this is his personality. I remember in 2013 when oh yeah, it was no control. It was like footage I didn't use. I asked him about his family, and his family's like, and he's like, oh, they just knew. Like, it doesn't shock them. He's always been this individual that I think super smart, excels, but pushes things.
Hmm.
Always there. That's his excitement. That's like joie de vivre, if you will, to
Mm.
just push it over the edge. But when he does it, it's not without purpose. It's not baked into something that a true antagonistic thing where it kind of unruffles everything around it. It's not just antagonism to be antagonistic, and then it's just like, oh, I did this thing. It's to create ripples throughout a system.
Mm.
Uh, I think
It's
it's
interesting because it makes me think about that Atlas quote. I love this quote. And when the first time I read it, the book Cloud Atlas, I think it's at the end, the quote. It's definitely at the end of the movie when they made the movie, but it's like our lives are not our own. From womb to tomb, we're bound to others, past and present. And with each crime and every kindness, we birth our future. And I don't know why this quote really stuck with me in my head, but I've sometimes feel as if, when sometimes you're on a path in life and you think you're making your own decisions, and there's a lot of friction when you're doing what you're not meant to be doing. But it's almost like you have this role in this simulation, let's call it. And when you're following it, it's almost inevitable. So it's almost like the way you describe it when you say his personality, like it's almost inevitable that his part to play, like, all the world's a stage, his part to play is to be the disruptor and to push against like the constraints of the matrix, if you like. Would that be
yeah.
a good description?
Sure. And I think there are individuals that are just born this way. Elon's like that. Assange
Mm,
was it takes not only a person who has these ideas, but to actually like full throttle implement them, it takes another stage of personality, because you either have to be so blissfully excited and obsessed by your idea, or that you're just unaware of what's going to happen, or you're just aware and you take it by the horns, right? You know that like danger, and you're attracted to that danger as much as you're attracted to the idea of what you're creating. I think a lot of individuals that do this kind of work in different fields, they love the danger of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was
My
listening to an
personal
interview.
opinion.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview last night with Glenn Greenwald, and he was talking about, the work that he did at the time exposing, the files that Edward Snowden had brought together. And it was just really interesting listening to him talk about his life and about how, he was living under high security in Brazil and still does, um, and kind of was very conscious. But he also talked about Snowden's mindset, how he knew that he was probably going to die or end up in jail for the rest of his life, but he just
Yeah,
felt compelled from a moral standpoint to do what he did.
sure.
So
And then at one point you can't get out. At one point, like you're in it. There's no returning. Um, and that
I
either
often
buckle.
I often wonder that about Assange. He sat there rotting in a British jail. God, I mean, it's such a shameful episode in British like legal history, whatever you want to call it. But I often wonder whether he sits there and he looks back and thinks if he would do something differently, or whether he's just fully committed and is like, if I had my time again, knowing what would happen, I would still
Or,
do the same thing.
oddly, like, huh. I mean, somebody needs to talk to him about that, I guess. I
Mm.
mean, you can come out in many ways. Maybe one day he will be relieved of all these of everything and being allowed to be free. And then, I wonder sometimes if that changes people's mentality when they do return to like their sense of freedom, be like, oh, it was all worth it. Because you have to kind of move your mind there. I think in order to continue, you have to. You can't, if you can't sit into that place, that like that danger, that okay, it was necessary because the life has to continue, right?
So
Um,
can you tell me about
I
you
feel
as
like
a filmmaker making this film? Were you ever concerned about your safety or your kind of like what trajectory? Because that brings a lot of attention on you. I mean, when I saw what the film was about, I was really fascinated to understand whether you were ever worried about, like the perception people would have of you and whether that would attract unwanted snooping or whatever into your personal life and what you were doing.
I mean, it was constantly told to me by other people. Oh, Jessica, I think I was so determined to make the film, I chose not to even, I'm not doing anything wrong.
So you're the same.
I guess, I suppose. I mean, that would have killed me if I was thinking about that all the time. My biggest stress was just whether or not I was going to be able to make the film that I wanted to make. That was the stress hanging over me for 8 years. Um, so yeah, I thought about it. Lots of people said it to me many, many times over the years. And I contemplated like, what in the world could I have been gotten in trouble for? Um, I mean, I don't do stupid things in my life. So sometimes if you don't do ridiculous things, then you don't get yourself in trouble as well, I suppose. No, I've never had that concern. It never really sat with me. The
Interesting.
concern, the concern was whether or not will I be able to accomplish this film. And I mean, I'm sure they tap everyone. Like, we can talk about this, but like, I don't know. I've never,
Well, well, I can tell you that Zoom is definitely not secure.
yeah, no, I mean, everything's jotted down. I would love to see bad things I've done because I can't really think of anything. So
I'm
I don't know.
curious, did the process of making the film change you? Like when because we haven't really talked enough about Bitcoin, and I don't know whether you have time, but I wish we had. But obviously you discovered that in 2013. I'm just curious, did the process of making this thing change your views or change you as a human being? Do you feel differently when you look at the world now?
Oh yeah. Oh, completely. 2013 when it was July of 2013 that I learned about Bitcoin. It wasn't even on film. We were just talking. He had seen some books on the table. And he told me about it and I was like, what is this? I'm late. I'm late. It's 2013. This has been happening. How could I just found out about this? And I jumped in, like I was all in. And of course, everyone's like, what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. Like you get all the like, it was so, I guess I'm attracted to these kinds of things as well. Personalities go for that. But Sorry, your question was how it
If it's
changed.
changed you. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, seeing how the legal processes work, seeing how laws are made or unmade, how media works as this like bubble to disseminate most of the time the exact same information. And one of the most wildest things while I was actually doing this, and especially in 2018 when the news came out, was to actually see the process. And nobody can see it unless they're like really obsessing about a theme. That somebody would, one media outlet would like print something and everybody would reprint the exact, nobody was doing any journalism. And like to see it in real time is a moment where you go, well, oh, shit, like this is just like a video, like an audio recording. They're just recording this and sending it out. And if no one's talking about it or checking it or anything, you're going to just assume it's true. But like to watch that in real time was so wild. So yeah, this has changed me. I mean, in tons of ways. I think my nature has always been in this world of slightly kind of like, to boil it down to, I don't know, conspiratory antagonism, all these kind of things. It's always been very interesting because my trust levels have been mostly just like trust yourself and what you know, over all things in life. But this really cemented it and brought in new ideas. And 2013 was a big changing moment. 2012, 2013, 2010, Assange, all this stuff. This was a big moment in time, including this like just massive growth of social media and how information is disseminated or locked down, or it's just, I think we've all been on this ride together. And like you said, like
Yeah. I
during
mean,
COVID, it woke up a lot of people too.
it did, yeah. And I mean, it's interesting, really, because for me, like my Bitcoin journey really started. I mean, I found out about it in 2011, but never like I was actually like, this sounds really boring. I'm ashamed to say. But I'm kind of really, like I would say, properly class of 2021 when I actually understood it. But it's an interesting process for me. I mean, I haven't had the experience that you've had with like Second Amendment, gun rights and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of Bitcoin, I had a background in finance. And for me, it was just a really interesting process of feeling much more excited and hopeful about the world, but also just when the veil is lifted and you just see the corruption and just how rotten the whole system is. I just had been so immersed in it, I didn't see it.
Sure.
I just wonder at the end of this kind of process as well, how do you feel? Sorry, this is maybe a bit of a big broad question, but
Try.
do you feel hopeful about humanity now, and like the journey that we're taking with like AI and technology and Bitcoin and all of these things? Does it give you a sense of hope? Or do you feel like a sense of anxiety about the trajectory that we're taking as a human race?
I decided a little while ago not to choose anxiety. I think you have to just choose it because it's too easy to like, because I've had moments where I just become overly consumed with like chasing information about a certain thing, and people are saying things online, you're paying attention. And part of that is like letting go. Like a lot of people, consuming less is actually a huge mental health boost, right? Um, I don't know. Like sometimes I do have those very kind of negative ideas of where society is going, but there's also this beautiful awakening at the same time. So I actually feel like it's up to individuals, and not really like, if you're constantly just fighting the man in your life and you're putting all this negative energy into just thinking about this negative space of what you don't like, but you're not creating anything else, that's where you get trapped. But if you can be, and I try to be, and that's like either in home and life and relationships and love with kids, whatever that is, to build, then you are absolutely in that moment working against everything you hate. Because in the end, we're individuals, and the collective of like, just like COVID changed a lot of people's minds, if you can just work on changing your environment, that echoes out, right? And I don't think any government, I think it's a false like idea that, oh, the US is so strong it'll never collapse and it'll never change. Like, what are we? We're just, you know, this is history repeats itself in every form. So the only way to be ready for that is try to build where you are and build good things. And if everybody starts doing that, then so I'm very positive because it's the only way to be. That's the only way to be. And then, you know, cover like my next film is on I'm doing a short film that's gonna premiere in El Salvador in August. So it's a short film on Nayib Bukele, who's the president of El Salvador. There's so much beauty in his story and what's happening in El Salvador. And then you look at the media and he's a fascist and he's all these things, right? So yeah, I mean, I can simmer in that negative world, as most people do, or they don't even think about it. They just believe what they read. Or you can go find something out and build information for other people. So I just hope to do that. And in that way, just, I don't know, build from there in a positive way. Yeah.
I
I
think that's a
don't
good point to wrap up then. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Where is it premiering out of interest? Like, I know you said El Salvador, but what event?
It's called a palestra. So there's I don't know what they're actually calling themselves now. I was the very first time Death Athletic screened. It was like prior to its premieres. I was invited down to go to this kind of like private conference hosted by Palestra in El Salvador. It was like the first time they did it. This is their third conference. It's actually going to happen in San Salvador, and it has everyone has been a different theme. So the last one was very health based with a guy named Dr. Jack Cruz and Daylight Computer and a lot of like just people that work on body and health holistically. It's a very different approach, a wonderful approach. And then this one is called Palestra Bureau, and there's going to be like designers and art and some politicians, I think. It's going to be a mix. It's going to be a little more, I think, a little bit more like like original conference style, like you show up and you hear all the speakers. Before it's been kind of like flowy and interesting. That's where it's gonna be. Anyone can go. Now it's like open to the public, so you can just get a ticket and you can go to Palestra, and it's a 2-day event happening in San Salvador.
Oh, amazing. Wow. And can you just let people know, by the way, thank you. This has been like
Oh,
immensely
talk
fascinating.
all
And
day.
I'm looking forward to watching the movie now. And I'll probably have another million questions afterwards. But could you let people know where they can find you? Like what social media channels you'd like to direct people to, websites and that kind of thing?
So Twitter, Instagram, Jessica Solce is my handle. And then Encode Productions, or you can use my name, jessicasolce.com, that has any kind of information, links to where to get the films. When my short comes out, that'll eventually be posted on there. Any link or happenings are happening there. Deathathletic.com is specifically for Death Athletic. And the BTC Pay server is down. I'm so sorry, but you can still get it on with Lightning on Geyser. I have to figure that back out. I feel like they came after Samurai and like cypherpunk tools went down. A few things went down. So I've been so busy. I haven't been able to get on top of that. It's very
Yeah,
bad.
2024. I said this at the beginning. It's going to be lit. It's an interesting year. I mean, it's funny for me. There's been a bit of a weird. I was on the streets protesting Trump's election when I was living in the US, which, by the way, I think I wasn't supposed to do because you're not
Okay.
supposed to engage in political activity when you're there in a working visa. But I was
Oh,
so angry that this like despicable man had been elected by my fellow citizens, and it's just been quite a funny journey for me to then see his presidency play out and obviously all of the Russia collusion stuff turn out to be completely untrue. But now to see him, and I know he probably got coached, well, he did get coached, and he obviously had people sit down and explain it to him. But to see him come out in favor of Bitcoin and finding myself in this situation where I'm kind of cheering him on. So it's been a really fascinating journey. And I feel like, yeah, this year is going to be quite a wild ride for all
yeah.
of us, because obviously, when America kind of causes a ripple, there's like a tsunami around the world. So
Gosh.
Yeah, and election years everywhere. I've just had my election thing through for the UK, so that's an interesting time for us as well. I don't know how immersed you are in UK politics, but we're having quite the yeah, quite the weird. Well, I mean, I think there's this year is a weird year because I think there's an immense number of countries around the world that are all having elections at the same time, which I think has almost never happened or something. So it's like
Mhm.
a very pivotal year. But obviously, everyone's watching the US election, which is going to be huge. So um,
Just won't stop talking about it for I love it in France. Like it's like we're gonna have an election. It's in a month. It's just like because I think there's lots of rules of like when you can actually start your start pitching yourself, whatever they call it. But in the United States, it basically the new president happens and then you just immediately start doing it. It's so intense. So yeah,
yeah.
we've got a storm ahead of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because as a Bitcoiner, I'm a bit kind of like, do I even participate in this process? But I don't know. I don't know. I still find it interesting from a societal perspective. Like, I'm
Sure.
not sure that I particularly think that our vote has much meaning because there's a bit of a uni party, and I think we've all seen this now play out, certainly in the Western world, that we're basically governed by uni parties, and it's a bit political theatre, really, the election process,
Sure.
in my view. But um, I still find it interesting just seeing like how people behave and the sorts of rhetoric that comes out and the positions people take. So the fact that Bitcoin is an election issue now in the US, I think is extremely positive and very interesting.
Yeah.
And given Trump's record, actually, when he was in office, I'm actually quite interested to see because I mean, unless they Epstein him, he will be the next president for sure.
You've
Um,
definitely went that's been a big, circle for a ride for you.
mm,
If you were there at the protests in 2016, this has been a
oh
huge
yeah.
ride for you.
Yeah, I was there with the pussy hats. I mean, I wasn't wearing one, but
One hell of a ride. You are
oh
truly
yeah.
good
Well,
now.
Bitcoin changes you, hey?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Interesting.
thank you so much, Jessica.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
so
This has
fun.
been fascinating. I hope to meet you in real life at some point as well. And thank you for taking the time. I mean, it's just an immense joy of my life to get to talk to all these amazing women in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And since I've started doing this, I've discovered there's just an insane number of you guys that I didn't even know were in this space. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And best of luck with the short film as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.